It's April 1945. You enter another nondescript German grey village looking for armoured you've heard is in the area. You picked up your Jeep the day before from the motor pool where they've been doing some work with it. You've had it since you were back in Britain before you came over into Normandy, and they told you they've done some changes to it. It's all good to go. You round a corner and get out of the Jeep and turn it off. You get on your radio and start speaking to the Pershings who are pushing up with you. Suddenly you hear a low rumbling. You put the radio down quick, you hop back in the Jeep, and you look through your screen just as you're about to start your Jeep. You can see the slab side of a Panther heading towards you, the gun traversing round. You turn on your ignition, you put your foot on the starter, and you go to start it to escape. This is what happens. The next thing you know, you're not sitting on OD canvas anymore, you're sitting on a white fluffy cloud. And instead of your M1 carbine in your hand, you've got a harp. What the hell just happened? How could your trusty Jeep, which has looked after you for so many years, suddenly have let you down? What did the boys in the motor pool do to it? I'm going to show you today, and I'm going to tell you exactly why I would not use a Jeep the way that I've got mine set up in a combat situation. I'm also going to tell you that it wasn't the Germans who you, it was the French. Yes, hello peeps, it's Greendot 319. Now before we talk about how the French did for you, what we're going to look at is something I read on the internet the other day. Just browsing around as I do, I was looking through the forums and I found an interesting thread someone had posted. They were talking about how they couldn't get their Jeep to run properly. It was backfiring through the carburetor and had a really rough idle. Now obviously this is a terrible thing, you don't want it to happen. It doesn't happen to a Jeep which is set up correctly. There's obviously something wrong with it. When a Jeep's set up correctly, it runs very fine and very nicely and it won't just backfire. Usually backfiring through the carburetor is going to be an ignition timing problem. The interesting thing about this is that the guy said that he had a way of fixing it, and it was quite an unusual thing, and it's something I have never seen before or come across. What he said is to get the thing to work again, he found, or he thought that he would try and use a different type of spark plug. What he thought he'd use are these things here. These are surface discharge or center discharge spark plugs. And what did he say about these spark plugs instead of using our normal Jeep spark plugs? Well, apparently these things cured all his problems. They made the Jeep run much better. They stopped all the backfiring. What's not to like about that? I reckon we got to try this and find out whether these magical plugs are an improvement over normal Jeep plugs. This here is a normal Jeep plug. You can see it's got a center electrode, it's got porcelain, and it's got this strap here where the spark jumps to over this little gap. That's normal. This is what he says to use. Surface discharge spark plug. You can see it doesn't look the same at all. There's no strap for the spark to jump to. It jumps to the side instead. Apparently these things, well, if you read online about them, some people say that they foul easily. Some people say they don't foul easily. Some people say they're only for use for high discharge ignition systems, extreme temperatures and pressures. And some people say, obviously, that they work well in two-stroke engines for outboard motors. This is what this is designed for. And that guy obviously felt that they work really well in an old Jeep engine. So what's not to like? We've got to try this out. If we can get magical smooth idling and better response and everything like that, it's well worth a shot. Let's stick these in here and see what happens. Well peeps, they're all in there. There's no gap to set up on them. There's no temperature range. They should just go in and run. So are we going to see an incredible improvement with the Jeep performance? Is the little L134 engine going to love these new surface discharge spark plugs, or is it just something peculiar to that guy's Jeep? Let's find out. Let's start it and see what happens. The Jeep is semi-warm now. It's been sitting here for an hour or two and cooled down, so we'll see if we can get to start normally. Right, prepare yourself. Here we go. Trying in surface discharge spark plugs in a World War II Jeep for incredible performance bonuses. Let's find out. Oh! Hey! That started really well. That launched off there. It doesn't usually launch off quite that well there. Very nice. Does seem like a good idle actually. Similar to how it normally idles, maybe a little less lumpy. It's possibly idling a little bit faster than I had it set with the other spark plugs. Seems really nice, yeah. Perfect. Awesome, they seem to run really well. So let's take it for a drive and see how it behaves. So far, so good. Right then peeps, should we try this thing out then and see how they go? See if these are better than using normal spark plugs. So far, so good. Right. Starts nice. Idles nicely. Let's go. Should we all be updating the World War II Jeep? I mean, it seems to be behaving just as it did before. I'm not noticing any difference here, peeps. Right, ready? Woohoo! Yeah, it just seems to be the same old Jeep. Obviously they helped this guy out and he was able to get over his backfiring problems, but for a normally set up Jeep which is running nicely, you know, it just seems to behave exactly the same as normal. So really, I can't see any reason you'd want to swap over to them. Perhaps if you have weird backfiring problems you can't solve, maybe they're good to swap over to, but otherwise, yeah, just seems the same as normal. Well, it doesn't seem to make much difference to how it drives or anything like that, so it can't be that bad, can it? Should we pull a plug and have a look and see how it seems? Does it look any more dirty or anything like that? You know, do these things foul or not foul? Let's have a look. It's kind of dark on the end. It's not looking totally clean. Interesting. Possibly more dark than I would expect a normal plug to look like. Interesting. Have to run them a bit more to work out exactly what's going on with them. But seems sort of okay, really. So then, am I going to run with centre discharge spark plugs for the future? Well, I think you can see already that I've swapped back to the old ones. Like most things with the World War II Jeep, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It just seems to work. There's no replacement for having a properly run Jeep. You can put band-aids on it, and this guy obviously was able to get some better performance out of it using those particular spark plugs for his particular problem. But a properly set up Jeep operating the way it should works absolutely fine with no requirement to mess with it at all. They're great. They didn't damage it or anything like that, those spark plugs, but I didn't notice any useful change. Again, maybe in a different situation with a different Jeep with some damage or something not quite set up right, you could get a better outcome. But for me, no obvious advantage there. So surface discharge spark plug for a World War II Jeep, I wouldn't bother if I was you. It's not worth it. Just save your 30 bucks or whatever and put your old spark plugs back in there. Going back to our earlier story then, just how exactly did the French do in for you? Now, this is quite interesting. It's something I've learnt using my non-standard Jeep, which is a possibility you could have had in early 1945 when they were looking for different carburetors to use and they started to use the French Solex carburetor. Now, this thing has got some weird traits and we all know about it. It's got cold starting problems. There's even a little placard on the dash which tells you exactly how to start it when it's cold. Now, I wouldn't want to have used these in a combat situation for this exact reason that I'm going to show you. Now, when the thing's cold, it's straightforward to start, fine, okay. When it's hot, it's quite quirky and it's quite different to the Carter. If you just picked one of these up from the motor pool and you had been told how to start it from cold, but not what happened when it's hot, it could definitely leave you in a situation where you couldn't get it to start. Why is this? What is going on in it? Why is it different to the Carter? Really simple to explain, actually. The Carter carburetor inside it, we all know, has got a metering rod to do the main jet. So there's a rod which pushes into a seat, which allows more fuel to go out to the main jet when you push down the accelerator. That's great. When the thing is it's idle or the throttle is closed, the rod seats in the bottom of a little nozzle and it stops any fuel flowing out of the bowl. The Solex has a different concept for its main jet. It doesn't use a metering rod. The fuel sits in this bowl, it goes up a central portion here and then gets sucked into the engine with no metering by a rod whatsoever. It uses air pressure and a different method of metering that fuel. A very good method if you're using it normally. However, when the Jeep is hot and it stops, what happens is the carburetor heat soaks. All the heat gets into it and it starts to make the fuel inside this carburetor boil over. With the Carter, the same sort of thing will happen. The fuel will start to get hot, the metering rod will be seated in its nozzle, no fuel will be able to be drawn out up to the main jet. In this, there's nothing to stop that. The fuel gets hot, it starts to boil over, it gets drawn up the main jet, even when the engine's not running, and it goes down into the intake manifold. The Carter will not do this. So what happens then if you sit for 5 minutes with the engine hot, all the fuel in that fuel bowl gets drawn up through the main jet, drops down into your inlet manifold, and when you go to start it, you have an inlet manifold completely full of a bowl's worth of fuel and practically no oxygen whatsoever. If you don't touch the accelerator pedal when you go to start it, you just leave it in your idle position like you would with a carter, there's no air mixture in there. We know there needs to be a 14:1 air to fuel ratio for an engine to run in its best efficiency. There's practically a 100% fuel ratio inside that manifold. So as you go to start it with the throttle butterfly nearly closed, no air goes in, only fuel, you have a super rich mixture and the engine just will not start. The carter, you do not have this problem. It's an incredible weakness of this carburetor, and it's the reason I wouldn't want to use this in a combat situation. I know how to get round it. All I do when I go to start it from hot after about 5 minutes of sitting is put down nearly full throttle on the accelerator pedal and then start it. That allows air to come into that super rich mixture and it'll start pretty much straight away. If you don't know that, or you forget to do that because you're under stress, you'll never get the thing to start. And if you've got a panther coming around the corner to come and blow you up, you're really going to have a bad day. Now, there is a workaround for this, which they managed to work out. The French army with their Solexes, I think sometimes had a heat shield underneath it to stop the heat soaking up into that carburetor and stop it all boiling over into that inlet manifold. There is another workaround for it as well. This is a 1950s British Solex manual, and it explains in it that many manifolds apparently have a small hole drilled in the bottom of them, about a 1mm size hole, which allows that excess fuel to drain out when the engine stops hot. Our Jeep manifolds obviously don't have that. They weren't built to use this carburetor, and no one ever changed the design for the French, or, well, for the French and these late war Jeeps. So the workaround works great in civilian lifestyle, but in a combat Jeep, no good at all. I would not use this great carburetor in combat. I wouldn't trust it. I'm much happier using the good old carter, but I love using it now in civilian times. I don't need to worry about getting blown up, and I also know how to start it. But a very interesting tale of something which could potentially have lethal consequences. So there we have it, a little bit more information about the World War II Jeep we didn't know before. Using modern surface discharge spark plugs doesn't seem to make that much of a difference for a normal running Jeep. Wouldn't bother with that. The Solex carburetor, when you actually start using it in anger and not just taking it out for small journeys and things like that, you start to notice the problems with it. Definitely wouldn't use that as a combat carburetor. I wouldn't bet my life on it. I wouldn't bet the life of other people on it as well. But to use it in a civilian world, fantastic, works fine. Gets you out of all the situations you need, don't have a problem with it. Interesting though, the things you find out when you start to use these things quite a lot, and the things you can learn. They all have a reason for the working the way they do and for the problems that we find with them. But in my my advice, if you're going to operate this vehicle in a combat zone again, is put a carter in it, don't stick with a Solex. That's it though, everybody. I hope you enjoy that. Like and subscribe, and join me next time for more weird Jeep adventures. Cheers.